Well, good evening. I hope we're live on YouTube right now. We've had a real problem today because it seems that Virgin doesn't work too well, and every now and again it cuts out. So it's quite possible that we could kind of lose this halfway through, and I'm really sorry about that. What I'm going to do is I'm going to record. Well, good evening. Oh, hello. Wait a minute. Let's get rid of that. I'm going to record this, and then we can put it up a little bit later on. I hope we're going to be able to get Dave as well soon. He's having trouble getting in from his neck of the woods as well. Let me tell you a little bit about what we're going to do. Our plan tonight is to talk to Dave about this title, Overcoming Depression. If you were with us last week, you'll have seen that we were thinking then about overcoming anxiety, and Dave was immensely helpful and had lots of good feedback about that. And if you want to hear that, you can just click onto YouTube and you'll be able to hear that from last week. Tonight's subject is a little bit more difficult and perhaps a little bit more challenging. Overcoming depression, loads of questions. You may have some questions. If you do, you can ask them in two ways. One is by just dropping them on the comment section here in YouTube, or you can ask your questions on Slido.com. That's Slido.com. Sounds a little bit odd, but it's actually a really good mechanism for asking questions anonymously. And if you go on there and put in the code 80418, you will be able to ask your questions. So that should work out fine. What I'm going to do is I'm going to just pause in a minute, try and get hold of Dave, and we'll start again in a few minutes. So if you're just watching this, give us just a few moments and we should be able to reconvene shortly, I hope. Dave, congratulations. We've managed to do the impossible. We've got in here on a night when it seems that a lot of the internet is going down around the country when it comes to Virgin. So that was my problem. I was just explaining to folks, we could drop out at any point. And if that happens, we'll just record this and sort it out a little bit later on. But hey, to be honest, it's worked pretty well for a month, so I'm not surprised. I'm not surprised.
Well, I'm going off my phone at the moment. I've hotspotted my phone, so
well
I don't know how that's going to work, but we'll see.
That's great. Dave, let me just. Some people would have tuned in last week, and they'll be familiar with what happened then. But can you just very briefly tell us about you? And how you got into this? That would help, I think.
Okay. Well, in the area of mental health, I describe myself as an enthusiastic amateur. I'm not a doctor. I'm not a psychiatrist. But I've had a lot of experience in trying to support people who've been struggling with anxiety or depression, sometimes psychosis. And over the years, I've spent a lot of time trying to understand that. And I've had a lot of help. I had some great help from medics, from people with more experience than myself. And lately, spending a lot of time training to be and then being a teacher of a thing called mental health first aid. So I describe myself as a self-supporting pastor. I still do pastoral stuff in my own church here in Sunderland and elsewhere. I've even recently done a university outreach week, which is a turn up for the books. I thought an old codger like me would never get to do that again. But so I do a mixture of things, but I support myself by doing mental health first aid training commercially. So I get to do something I really enjoy, which is spend a couple of days in a room full of people who may not share my own Christian views, my own Christian faith. And I really enjoy being with people who are coming from those kinds of backgrounds. It gives me the chance to be salt and light in that circumstance.
Thank you. Just help us out a little bit with this, because this topic of depression is big, isn't it? And I guess over the last, I don't know, 30 years, you've come across a number of people who've been depressed in different ways. Can you just help us with it a little bit? I'm going to hand over to you in a minute and let you just talk. And I know you're going to do that now without any slides. So I don't know how you're going to manage with that. But
well, we'll try the slides. I just don't quite know if I've got the bandwidth on this phone.
No, okay.
I mean, I started to meet people with depression very early on in Christian ministry. Initially, students who dropped out because they weren't very well. And it was a bit hard to understand then. They were describing a state of mind that made no sense to me at all. And you couldn't help thinking, because I'd never experienced anything like it, you can't help thinking, well, is this real? Are they just having me on? Is this actually just an excuse? As time went on, it became clear. People that I was meeting, spending time with, trying to support, that these folks were really struggling with something that I didn't understand at all. Now we're going back to the kind of early 1980s then, so it's knocking on for 40 years. And I think I'm being fair in saying that I didn't really understand what depressive illness was. Neither did very many people in the medical profession. Because if you go back maybe 50 years or so, treatments for depression, anxiety, etc., were quite crude. They were not well understood conditions. When I first started out in Christian ministry, it felt to me as though psychiatry had reached the stage in 1981 that surgery had reached at about the time of the Battle of Trafalgar. And the treatment that people were getting was pretty much bite on this while we saw your leg off sometimes. And occasionally visiting people in hospital who were very, very ill was quite a scary business. And so all of the stereotypes reinforced. The great news is that over the last 40 years, these things have been understood far more accurately, scientifically, on the basis of evidence. A taxonomy of mental illness has been worked out that makes sense, a classification, a set of names for different conditions, precise definitions of diagnoses, or as precise as you can get, and much better treatments. So the situation now is much, much better than it was way back then. And for me, it's been a kind of growing sense. I remember when I was at Knighton doing what you do, we had a couple of doctors in the church who kept feeding me stuff about mental health and psychiatry, because I kept asking them awkward questions, and that was really helpful. And my kind of interest started there and kind of grew as I met more and more people who were struggling with one kind of issue or the other. And so meeting people and trying to find out about their condition and trying to engage with them is really how I grew in this. I don't know if that touches your question at all, but
thank you.
Yeah.
We've got an ambitious title tonight. Overcoming depression might be slightly too much.
Yes.
But certainly helping people with depression would be fair. Do you want to just take us through a few things? I could keep going all night on my questions, but if you've got any questions, you're listening into. There's a number of people now watching. Again, sorry if you've tuned in, had trouble at the start. It was our fault. We've had internet problems, but there you go. But we're okay now. If you've got any questions you want to ask Dave about anything to do with depression, just drop them in the comments section here on YouTube, or you might want to just go on to slido.com, and if you put in the number 80418, you can ask those questions anonymously. And I'll put them to Dave. Dave, talk to us a little bit about it, though, first of all, and then we can come back at you, if that's all right.
Okay. Well, two preliminaries, really. One is to say that people recover from depression. Most people, almost everybody recovers. Almost everybody recovers really well. And a lot of people for whom depression is part of the landscape of their lives manage to live with that really well. So recovery is possible, recovery is likely, and actually recovery is partly to do with how you respond to your circumstances. So you have agency in your own recovery, you are part of your own recovery. So I think that's really important to start with, that there is hope. Even if depression seems very, very dark. And the second thing is that perhaps just worth pointing out that over the next 40 minutes or so, we may well touch on issues that for some people are very, very sensitive. So just to say, if that's you, take a bit of time out, maybe do some of the things that for you help you to recover your mental balance. Don't be afraid to switch this off and just get some time. And if you need to, talk to somebody, the kind of person that you find helpful to talk to when you do that kind of thing. So there's just a couple of things before we go on. So shall I bash on and just
thank you.
Medics call depression a mood disorder. It's when your mood becomes very, very low, in such a way that it affects you emotionally. You feel very low. It affects your thought processes. Often you're not thinking straight, you're not thinking right. Sometimes it can have a physical effect on you. You can't get sleep, or you sleep too much. And some people, I have a friend, and when he's having a seriously bad episode, he physically slows down. So that actually he's moving more slowly. Most doctors would say there's a 2-week sort of assessment. If this goes on longer than 2 weeks, you might well be diagnosable as depression, though obviously no doctor's going to say, oh, it's only been 13 days, mate, come back tomorrow and we'll diagnose you. It's a lot of experience and intuition, I think, goes into this kind of diagnosis. And I suppose to talk a little bit about the symptoms. What are the symptoms of depression? And I thought to do that, I'd tell you a story of a friend of mine, a very good friend of mine, who clearly, as far as I was concerned anyway, had a depressive illness. As a result of a number of things that had happened in his life, he became very low. And I kind of encouraged him, as I would encourage anybody who's listening to this, who might feel they have depression or a depressive kind of thing going on in their lives, to talk to a doctor. I encouraged this guy to go to a doctor, but he really wouldn't. He was frightened his boss would find out. He was frightened that, the doctor would have to tell, he operates heavy machinery, so he's going to have to tell the boss. So he didn't, until he was working away. He was working away in a very remote part of Britain. And while he was there, he went to see a local GP. And the GP he phoned the GP's surgery and said, look, I need to talk to somebody about my mental health. And they gave him an appointment. And when he walked in, they gave him this little questionnaire that the receptionist gave him. The questionnaire said, well, fill that in and I'll give it to the doctor, and then the doctor will have a chat with you. And she was great, actually, the doctor. And this little questionnaire, it's a patient health questionnaire. It's kind of based on the NICE guidelines for diagnosing depression. And it asks questions about your interest or pleasure in doing things. Because one of the symptoms is perhaps that a lot of people lose interest in things that they were very motivated to do before. It asks questions about your feelings, being depressed, feeling low, feeling hopeless. Questions about your sleep patterns, your appetite, your energy levels. Questions about concentration. And asks questions about thoughts around suicide towards the end as well. And there's a little score, and that gives you a little idea of how poorly you might be. So the doctor, acting on NICE guidelines, National Institute for Clinical Excellence guidelines, used that little tool to work out where my friend was at. And my friend had a really useful conversation with this doctor, which didn't involve medication. She said, I can't give you any medication, but we can talk about lifestyle and the stuff that you're doing. So they talked about that. And then he got back to his hometown, and a few days later went to see his own GP, because this actually was a rehearsal. He did, like a lot of guys are very reluctant to go and get any kind of help. Maybe self-medicate as a result, use drink a lot, maybe use drugs. And having rehearsed what it felt like to go and talk about this with a doctor, as opposed to a broken leg or a sore throat, he went, and that conversation was a bit of a turnaround for him as well. And again, it didn't involve medication, but it did involve addressing issues around his lifestyle and other things as well. So those are the kinds of symptoms. Dropping mood, low pleasure in doing things you used to enjoy before, sleep patterns up the spout, either sleeping too much. A girl came into our food bank a few months back, 15 years old, to collect a food parcel for a family. So we try, before lockdown, we try and engage with people and have a cup of coffee, have a chat. And one of the team, who had a bit of mental health first aid training, just said, look, tell us, why have you come for this? Where's your mum? And mum was in bed and hadn't gotten out of bed for 3 days. And is she poorly? No, I think she's just sad. So little flashing light there, red light. And the nice thing was we were able to get mum some help, basically, by kind of tipping the right people off, that there was a family here in distress. So she wasn't leaving bed. Other people maybe go to bed and they can't get to sleep, or they get to sleep, they wake up at 2 o'clock in the morning, can't get back to sleep again. So those sorts of things, symptoms. Do you want to pick up a question or two, or shall I bash on?
Let me pick up some questions. Some folk asking a few here. Somebody's asked, if depression is partially genetic, how can I defend myself against inheriting it?
Yeah. Well, I mean, the jury's out on exactly how much inheritance is involved with depression, though if you look at families where there's a story of depressive illness down through the generations, you can certainly see there must be some connection. So that's the first thing. The second thing about genetics, I think this is great news, actually, if there is genetic illness in your family. I've got blue eyes. I think you have too, Andy, haven't you?
No, I've got lovely hazel eyes, Dave.
You've got lovely hazel eyes, yeah. Well, there's a gene for that, and it's monogenetic. It's you either have it or you don't. Most mental health conditions seem to be polygenetic. There are lots of genes involved right across the genome, and some of them are switched on and off by environmental conditions. So most of the work that's been done, and this has been done on schizophrenia, as far as I'm aware, you can have all the genes that code for schizophrenia and no symptoms. And it's entirely dependent on not just your genes, but also your environment. So this old nature-nurture argument, no, it's your genes, no, it's your upbringing, no, it's your genes, no, which is often politically shaped as much as anything else, is a bit of a nonsense, really. It's a mixture. And you can have agency over how things work out in the way that you've been brought up, ways you can't control. Obviously, there's no agency there, but you can sometimes with your lifestyle choices and how you react to certain things. So you do have some control.
So for this person with depression running through the family, perhaps a little bit nervous about that and wanting to kind of defend themselves, what are the sorts of things they should do, shouldn't do?
Lifestyle is really important. Going back to that sort of initial little chat about psychology and psychiatry that has largely concentrated over the last 60 years in the study of human dysfunction, what goes wrong and why. But there are also many aspects of psychology that are about human good function. What is it that makes people happy? What is it that guards and nurtures their well-being? And so there's quite a bit of experimental work and therapeutic work around that. And all of the work that's been done seems to home in on the same sorts of things. So I often talk about the 5 ways to well-being, which is a New Economics Foundation tool. And it talks about connection, which is your relationship with people, learning, which is learning new skills, developing and using your mind, keeping active, moving more, and that could be vigorous activity. You run marathons, or it could be just the fact that you go for a walk every day. You take the dog for a walk, or take yourself for a walk every day. N is for notice, which is about noticing your environment, enjoying, savoring your environment, being able to be, not just do. Rest, relax, enjoy where you are. But it also has an element of being self-aware. So you're in a meeting with people and you think, oh, I wish I hadn't said that way. Why did I get cranky? That question, why did I get cranky? Hang on a second, why did I get cranky? What's going on? I didn't sleep. Why didn't I not sleep? That kind of self-aware and self-analytical, self-critical thing, up to a degree, is really helpful. So that notice things, and G is give. Be involved with someone else's support and well-being. Not just give money, which is lovely, but give of yourself to the support of someone. So that's connect, learn, stay active, notice, and give. And a great way to remember that is CLANG, C-L-A-N-G. That's how I remember it. So there's a terrific website actually, which is called, I've forgotten what it's called, but I'll come back to it later.
Right.
It's very, very helpful. Just look, it just explores positive psychology, things that help you. And from a spiritual perspective, I think we've got turbo 5 ways to promote well-being, because all of those things are part and parcel of church life, from connecting with God through to learning. We're learning communities, through to giving. We're giving communities. We're involved with other people all the time. So the church is a great place to be if you're not well psychologically. And to know God personally is a great place to be if you're not well psychologically, providing your relationship with God doesn't drive you bonkers. And we might come to that a bit later on.
All right. I'll link to some of these things at the end. So if people want to come back, they can find these different sites and remember what clang stands for and so on. I've heard you do that, and with a big picture of a clanger on it. In fact, last time I was watching you on another YouTube channel. Somebody.
And I come back to it, not because I'm being paid by the New Economics Foundation, I'm not, but it's just a great way to remember, an easy thing to remember.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
The website, I'm going to remember, when I remember the URL, the website I'm going to mention has a 10-point thing called Ocean Dream, which does something very similar, except it adds a number of things that are to do with having a purpose greater than yourself.
Yeah.
And that too is something that Christians have. That comes as part of the package. We are part of the kingdom of God, a purpose greater than ourselves. So,
all right, Dave, let me, the questions are coming through thick and fast now. So let me just ask you some of these. Are there any inpatient or community treatments for severe depression that you'd be concerned about as a Christian? This person says, example, meds, CBT, DBT, and so on. So are there any treatments for severe depression that would concern you?
Well, I'm going to tell you what I think on the basis of the Word of God and personal experience. If another Christian was sitting here, they may give you a different answer. So I have a friend who came for a chat a couple of years ago, and she's an older lady in another church, and she'd been to a doctor, she'd been diagnosed with a depressive illness. They sent her to a psychiatrist, so she must have been very ill. And the psychiatrist, she was on the waiting list, and she'd been given some medication. She talked to her pastor about it. And the pastor said, in no uncertain terms, you must not take that medicine. It will harm you. And you must not go and see a psychiatrist. He will damage you spiritually. And she was in a quandary, actually, because paralyzed with depression and anxiety, she wanted to do the right thing, but she knew that she was very, very ill indeed. And so we had a conversation about that. And what I said to her was this: medication isn't what it used to be. The doctor won't pump you full of medication. He'll start you step by step to find the right dose and the right medication. You might have to try one or two different medicines before you find the right one for you. So you can trust your doctor to do the right thing medically. And there may be other therapies that he'd suggest, and CBT is one of them. So we'll come to that in a minute. And you may well find that your psychiatrist is not a believer, probably won't be. You might even get a psychiatrist who's pretty antagonistic towards the Christian faith. You might, but he's a professional, and he's not going to tell you that. He's going to try and do the best for you to get you back to a good level of mental well-being. One or two psychiatrists have made snide remarks to friends of mine. One doctor asked a friend of mine, you don't happen to be a member of an evangelical church, do you? And he said, well, yes, I am. And it was something that this doctor had noticed, that some evangelical Christians are pretty hung up on some things. So he might ask you questions about your spiritual life, but they're relevant to your medical condition. He wants to do the best for you. And I think we can trust these guys. And if you find you've got a doctor who's antagonistic towards Christian stuff, well, get another doctor. Go back to your GP and say, look, this guy was really rude. You can do that. after all, ultimately, you're paying for these people. So, so that's that. I personally, I wouldn't be averse to some medication. Medication can make a huge difference to people, and the right medication, supervised in the right way by a caring doctor, is a really good tool. We'll come back to that a bit later, because I think it's part of a number of things. A lot of doctors won't prescribe medication to start with. They might try you out on some exercise, because for a lot of people with mild to moderate depression, exercise is just as effective as antidepressants. But the effectiveness of exercise or medication or other kinds of therapy seems to vary from person to person. It's very, very individual. It's possible that a doctor might prescribe a course of CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy. And CBT is really about learning how to capture unhelpful, destructive ways of thinking. Ask yourself the question, why am I thinking that way? What's the cause of that? What evidence have I got to think like that? And then to learn to think more positively, differently about your situation. A lot of people find CBT tremendously helpful. Where does CBT come from? If you go back far enough, it comes from essentially Stoic philosophy. So probably one of the first CBT practitioners was a man called Epictetus, who was a Greek Stoic. And Epictetus taught, when we talk about this up here, I usually say that the time Hadrian visited Newcastle to discuss building a wall with his engineers, Epictetus was at the height of his fame then. And he talked about it's not what happens to you that's important, it's what you think about what happens to you that's important. And when he was a young man, his master broke both his legs just because he could. And Epictetus had to solve this problem. What's that going to do to my life? This is tremendously interesting spiritually, because it comes up against what we call sanctification. How do we make spiritually significant changes in our lives? And there are various views of how to do that. For some, God does it all. And all you do is listen to the word and worship God and pray, and God does all the sanctification stuff. He does that stuff. So if you're worried about getting angry with people too much, just do that and you'll change. There's an element of truth in that. I think there's an element of truth in that. But there are others who say, no, what you've got to do is you've got to address your behavior and learn new ways of behavior. So you say, well, I get angry in these circumstances, so I need to be alert. Maybe avoid some of those circumstances. And when I start getting angry, I need to take these positive steps not to. And that idea of learning how to handle your sin, a bit like the way a tennis player learns how to return a serve. To start with, it's difficult, but eventually it becomes automatic. That's how God changes us.
Thank you.
And of course, the result is, well, I'm not going to tell you what I think the truth is, but I think there's a strong element of truth in both of those things. CBT tries to address, what can I do to change my behavior? I think that can't be a bad approach allied to prayer, knowing God, worship, spiritual growth. Sorry, I think I'll tend to rabbit on. So
I think what we found is that I think the danger is to just think, well, okay, either I'm not going to go to these professionals because they're somehow scary or tainted, or I'm just going to completely outsource to them and they will deal with everything and make it better. And the truth is, I think you just need everybody, don't you? So get some professionals, but also have some friends who walk with you, with it through you, with it, the whole process. So they stay with you and talk about it with you, and the whole thing kind of helps you, doesn't it? Really,
I think so, Andy. Essentially, if we get it right, Christians are rebels. That means everything that's thrown at us, we ask the question, is that good or is that bad? Is that helpful? Is that unhelpful? Is it wise? Is it unwise? Now, that's got to be true with psychiatry and everything that goes with it, just as it's true of education, politics, etc., etc. So, and some Christians are uncritically part of, and some Christians do the opposite. They withdraw from. So we've got our own schools. We school people in our own homes because we don't want to be there. But most of us navigate this by being in the world, but not of it. So I think if you're working with a CBT practitioner, helping you say to cope with an anxiety problem, you've got a wonderful opportunity to learn a bit more about how God changes you. And I genuinely believe that most Christian arguments between two opposite poles are arguments between two different personality types, to be honest. And the truth is almost always lies in a tension between the two opposites. Freedom of will or predestination. You need a tension. And without tension, the trampoline doesn't work. So
thank you. Dave, loads more questions here. If you've got some questions you want to ask, then ask them either on YouTube. Lots of people ask them on Slido. It's anonymous. It's a lot easier. I've got. Can I just read you? This is a text from a friend who will remain anonymous, but texted me and said, "Look, you're talking to Dave. I want you to ask him this. Because of a particularly bad period of depression, I was prescribed medication, which massively helped in getting me back to normal. However, although I don't get depressed in the medical sense anymore, I can't come off the medication because I dip straight away." Now, this person's a Christian, but saying, how do I come to terms with this? Am I going to be on this medication potentially for a long time? Is that wrong? They obviously feel a bit torn by that.
Yeah, I'm not surprised. I'm not surprised. The truth is, Andy, that the answer to that question is above my pay grade. I'm not a doctor. And what I would suggest is, if that person can, have a conversation with a doctor who's a Christian. And if that's a struggle for that person, I can put them in touch with a Christian psychiatrist who could give them some really good insight on that. So if we have a communication privately about that, that might be a good way forward. I think a lot of Christians struggle with being dependent on medication because it seems to be dishonoring to God. And I can understand that. And it's another one of these tensions, I think, again, I can understand that, but maybe in the same way that someone who's diabetic needs to take the right medicine to overcome that problem, someone who is depressed, as our friend has been, might need to be on long-term medication to overcome that problem too, because the alternative is very dark. One of my best friends here is someone who struggled with anxiety for many years. And the doctor was very keen to put her on medication to help her with her anxiety, but she felt that that wouldn't really honor God. She should trust God and overcome the anxiety, which is absolutely a blue-blooded instinct, isn't it? You can't fault that. It's a great instinct. She was changed, actually, one Christmas when another very good friend of mine, who suffered for many years with depression, sent out a Christmas letter. Now, this guy's a pastor for many years, and my other friend respects this individual very, very much. And there was a little paragraph in this Christmas letter on this guy's struggle with depressive illness and how helpful he'd found a recent treatment that he'd been given by his doctor. And the last line in the paragraph, it was, I'm a pastor on pills and I'm grateful. Mm. That really transformed my friend's approach, and she agreed to a course of medication. It did her a lot of good. Mm. Because sometimes we dip too far to be able to help ourselves. But with the help of medication, she was able to begin, through changes in lifestyle and greater awareness of what kicked her off, make those changes. And so I think it boils down in the end to humility. Sometimes we can't get through life without accepting that we need some kinds of help. And it might be more to do with pride, even spiritual pride, to say, well, others might, but I don't. I don't need that. And it might be that you do.
Thank you. Dave, just another question. Somebody asking, is being worried about something and losing sleep because of it this kind of depression? And I guess that kind of opens up the question, what is depression? How do I know when it's clinical? How do I know when I'm just feeling a bit blue?
Yeah.
What does that look like?
Well, it's a bit like we talked about anxiety last week. I think some people are depressed and some people just have feelings. They're very powerful feelings sometimes, and it keeps us awake at night. We worry. It affects our mood. It might go on for weeks. It might go on past your 2-week period for diagnosis of depression, but it doesn't mean you've got depression. I think the key question is it disordering your life? Is it over time preventing you from being the person that you know you could be, from doing the things that you know that you could do? Is it disrupting? Is it making a mess of things? At that point, that's a good point to go and talk to somebody about it. Whether or not it's depression is somebody else's decision. And doctors are trained and experienced in making that call. And so I would trust them to make that call. But we can be profoundly low and not be depressed. All of us, at some point or other, will have reason, if we haven't had so already, to go through those very dark times.
Thank you. This might seem a bit more trivial, but a friend knew you were on and said, look, ask Dave this. This is somebody who doesn't get depressed, but has friends who are depressed, and just says, I never know quite how to greet them.
Right.
And I always feel I'm putting my foot in it, how you doing just seems a bit kind of trite. How can you greet somebody without kind of putting your foot in it? Because many of our greetings are just very superficial.
Yeah.
Hi, how are you? I'm fine, thank you very much. And it's all that kind of stuff. How do you get around that mess, that social mess that we create?
Well, I think that's one of the reasons why we might not be as supportive as we could be with folk who are struggling with depression or anxiety or other things, because we don't know what to say. And people who've been bereaved often feel that they've been isolated, and they are often aware it's not that people are avoiding them, it's just that they don't know what to say. So I think what you do is you say something. And in lots of ways, it doesn't matter. You're their friend. So how are you doing is a perfectly good question to ask. How are you doing today?
Yeah, that's good.
Where's your heart at today? Sometimes people will want to talk, sometimes they won't want to talk, but it's good just to show an interest and be there and not avoid people because they're in a very, very low mental state. And it's the other reason I think that people avoid conversation is because perhaps if someone is so ill, you'll feel very drained at the end of the conversation. And you will. Because if you're listening actively to someone, it's an activity. And so you feel as though you've been doing something, and you have. So yeah, I just be normal, engage people in conversation. How are you doing? What are you finding helpful? How can we support you? How can I support you? What do you need? Might be nothing, can't think of anything. Well, just be there, just be together. There's a great picture in the Bible of how this works, I think, in the book of Job. Job, Old Testament book, and Job is this stunning super saint. He's godly, and in the Old Testament way of showing how godly he is, he's filthy rich, and he's got everything you could dream of. Fantastic family, kids all at university, all in their different universities, president of their Christian unions, just doing really well. Everything's brilliant. And then the devil goes to God and says, he only worships you because you give him an easy time. And God says, okay, go and do your worst. And everything is taken away from Job. Job winds up sitting on an ash heap. And the text said he was scratching himself with a potsherd, which is a broken fragment of pot, which is the closest bit in the New Testament, apart from Elijah and the prophets of Baal, to self-harm I can see in the Bible. Here's Job scraping himself with this pot. And then his friends turn up, which is great. He's got 3-4 friends. And the fact that they turn up is brilliant. So I think that's a great lesson from the book of Job. Turn up, be there. Unfortunately, there 2 things went wrong with Job's friends. One, they couldn't stop talking. And so the whole book is these guys talking at Job and Job's answers. And perhaps worse, they couldn't stop groping for an explanation. I know what's wrong. This is what you've done. And neither of those things were really helpful. But just being with Job, if it just stopped and made a cup of coffee or whatever they did in the 15th century BC and just sat there with him, that would have been such a better example. So don't avoid your friends and just try and have normal conversations is what I would say.
Thank you. Just from the other way around, somebody's saying, what's the most common response people get when they let someone in church know that they're depressed? I guess that depends who you talk to. Really.
Depends who you talk to. One of the things, excuse me, one of the things I've been doing over the last few years is to try and have as many structured conversations as I can with church people who've had medical treatment for anxiety or depression. And one of the things I've been interested in is how supportive churches have been. And I've talked to people from a wide variety of churches. And the great news is people find other Christians very supportive. I think it's been lovely, actually, some of the stories that people have told, and that's been really encouraging. So I think church is potentially a wonderfully healing places. Sometimes you get a very negative response. Where's your faith? You're supposed to be joyful as a Christian, and maybe people might rebuke you for that, or they don't think they're rebuking you, but they are. But in my experience, that's rare. And the experience of the people I've talked to, that's rare. So often the response is quite positive.
Thank you. I've got two more kind of questions here that they're both really good. Somebody's saying, I mean, this is a little sensitive, but how should you react to certain churches who affirm that God can heal or free you from depression or anxiety without professional assistance? What would you say to a church that said that to somebody?
Okay. Well, God does heal, and prayer gets answered in many, many remarkable ways. Churches that say God always heals, and then when that healing hasn't happened, blame it on you, can make you worse, not better. So you haven't got enough faith, or more perniciously, you haven't given enough money, or you're not fervent enough. All of those things, it's snake oil, really. It's not Christian faith, it's snake oil. And the sad thing is, there's a sad and a dangerous thing. The sad thing is, churches like that can leave Christians enduring condemnation when they should be experiencing freedom and joy, even in a dark time, experiencing what it is to know God who loves them. And churches like that are denying people that experience, that comfort. The danger is that some of those believers may well take their own life. Because with depressive illness, in its serious forms, it can always have the risk of suicidal thoughts that lead to that. So I think pastors who say that, churches who teach that, are, in the end, eventually, they're denying people their gospel right, which is not healing, on the spot, on demand. That's not a gospel right. But our gospel inheritance is joy, peace, love, hope. And we need churches which constantly harp on about God's grace, God's generosity to failures and broken people. And the church is a society of broken people. And I think people feel very comfortable in a society of broken people. My mum wouldn't come to church when I first became a Christian. She came once. I said, well, why don't you come again, Mum? She said, well, I feel they're all looking at me and talking about the fact that I'm divorced. Because that was the uppermost thing in her mind. When the penny eventually dropped that about a third of the people in our church were divorced, it made a difference. She suddenly felt not condemned. If we portray ourselves as, four square, perfect, then we're in trouble, really, aren't we? We really messed it up.
Just, I think this person picked up probably on what you said a little bit earlier. If I have some agency, you were talking about, you have agency earlier on. Yeah. If I do have some agency and there are things I can do to prevent being depressed, is it my fault if I'm still depressed?
Hang on a second. I'm hoping to share a desktop with you, but I'm struggling slightly. I might just have to twiddle around a bit.
Yeah, that's fine.
I think one of the things that it's good to acknowledge is that God gives us agency in our own spiritual lives, striving to complete what God has started in us, and that's quite important. But what I'd like to, if I could share with you, right? I think we're almost ready. let me just share this with you, just to give you a bit of a picture of this. It's just a PowerPoint. Yeah. There's a big quote on here from Spurgeon. I think it's worth quoting anyway. And this is Spurgeon commenting on one of the Psalms. It's all very well for those who are in robust health and full of spirits to blame those whose lives are sicklied o'er with the pale cast of melancholy. But the evil is as real as a gaping wound. It appears to be a matter of fancy and diseased imagination. Reader, never ridicule the nervous and hypochondriacal. Their pain is real, though much of the evil lies in the imagination. It's not imaginary. Spurgeon had a real problem with depression all his life. And his comments on the Psalms that are like Psalm 88, actually, written by somebody who probably was himself depressed. His comments on the Psalms are amazing, and that's one of them. Let me just trot back through this. This is a little thing I've called King David Visits His GP. It's based on Psalm 6, where if you tick off the points, diagnostic points on the patient help questionnaire for depressive illness, David comes out as moderately to severely depressed in Psalm 6. So there he is at the bottom of a well. Well, there's you or me at the bottom of the well. And this illustration, by the way, is not my own. Some of you at night might remember Hilary Johnson, Paul and Hilary Johnson. This is Hilary Johnson's illustration. And we're at the bottom of a well. Everything's dark. Our friends seem miles away. They want to help us, but we seem miles away. And we're treading water just to stay alive, and it's exhausting. You can't, feet doesn't touch the bottom. But the thing is, there's a ladder down the side of the well. And if I could get the bottom rung of that ladder, I'd be able to climb out. The problem is that I can't reach the bottom rung of the ladder, so I need help. And that's where my friends come in. My friends' support and their prayers, and maybe taking me out for a walk or a jog, or just for a cup of coffee or something, or showing an interest, making a phone call. All of those things add water to the well, raise the level of the water. I may need professional help to raise the level of the water. I might need medication, which will help me for a while. I might need some other kind of talking therapy like CBT or some other kind of counseling. But the thing is, when I get to the bottom of the ladder, I can climb out by myself. And I think there is a combination of agency. Yeah, I can do things that will help me to recover. That means I can't be passive. I have to be active. And I have to engage with treatment. I have to engage with what's happening. But it might well be that is beyond me. I can't do it. And that's where some of the other therapies come in, particularly medication. Medication can help us regain the energy and the desire when we don't feel those things to engage with treatment. So a GP may say, well, look, I think CBT would do you the world of good, but you won't manage that without some medication. So take some medication to help you engage with the therapy. So it's both, you see, and they work together. And that's nice because some people go very limp when they talk about mental health. So, oh, well, I've got mental health problems, so that's it, really, that's me. No, you can recover, but you need to have agency in your own recovery. You need to engage with it. CBT is quite difficult, actually. A lot of people drop out of CBT because it's too tough. You have to engage with it. And when you engage and when others help you, and for a Christian, when God helps you, it's teamwork. It's this beautiful teamwork that leads eventually to proper recovery. That's my picture of recovery. And people who say to me, you can't be spiritual and depressed at the same time, I'll go and say, well, look at C.H. Spurgeon. If he wasn't spiritual, I don't know who is.
Dave, thank you very much. That's a really helpful diagram. Thank you. Just somebody texting in now saying the thing that's really helped me is friends just listening.
Yeah.
To be honest, just as you were saying with, Job, the friends turned up, they were there. Challenge for all of us, really.
Yeah. Well, evangelical Christians, we love the word, don't we? And that often translates into loving our words. And talking and talking and talking till we find the right words to effect change. And I think it's worth going through a gospel with a highlighter pen and highlighting the questions Jesus asked. There are dozens of them. And he seems to me to have been as good a listener as he was a speaker.
David, we've been going an hour. I've got another question here. I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to pause that because I hope I managed to persuade you to do a trilogy of these interviews.
Okay.
Are you free next Monday?
I can be, yes. Yes. I mean, if this is valuable.
I think it's very valuable, Dave. Thank you.
What would you like to do a third one on?
I'm not sure. Why don't we ask people, what would you like, Dave, to do a third one on?
Well, can I pop an idea into your head?
Yeah, do.
I've mentioned Hillary Johnson.
Yeah.
Who, with her husband, now lives in Oxford. Now, she's a proper psychiatrist, actually, and would be well worth. So should we try and persuade Hillary to come and join us?
Be great.
Because then I could just make a cup of tea and listen to Hillary.
Let's do that. We'll try and have a few themes we can put it, but I'll bring, there's a question here on self-harm and suicide, and we haven't got, I'm not going to make you answer that in 30 seconds. So we need to think.
Well, maybe we could pick that up next week.
Yeah, that would be great.
Yeah.
Dave, I suppose one question is, if somebody has been listening to this and is really struggling, just, finding it very, very, this has actually been quite painful to go through. What should they do?
The first thing I would say is don't keep it to yourself, talk about it. So talk to a friend that you can trust. It would be good to get some professional help. And one or two folks after last week pointed out that can be difficult. But there are some good ways to go about that. One would be to make an appointment to see your GP. And what I would do is, if you've been feeling like this for a while and you're not in an emergency and feeling suicidal, make an appointment to see the GP that you like best, the one that you relate to best, because that person is probably going to be most helpful to you. It's tricky at the moment. I can't go and see my GP because of lockdown. So it is difficult at the moment. So I'll give you an alternative in a little while. So make an appointment to see a GP. Be prepared to wait for a couple of weeks if necessary to see the right GP. But also be prepared for not a one-off visit, but a relationship with your GP, because it might take that person a while to work out how best to help. And working together is going to be the order of the day. So be prepared to go back again a few times and not just for a one-off. So that's ideal. Less than ideal, but really helpful, actually, a lot more helpful than people imagine, is NHS 111, which is this phone line that is available to all of us. And quite often there'll be a mental health nurse on duty. But even if not, the person who handles the call will take you through a triage process. And if they think you need to talk to a professional, then a psychiatrist can ring you back, or a GP or a doctor, another kind of doctor can ring you back and you can have a conversation, or a mental health nurse can ring you back. If they feel this person is really quite poorly, we better see them soon, they'll invite you to come into casualty or into a drop-in centre they use in Sunderland. And usually when we've done this here, you've arrived at casualty with an appointment, so you don't have to sit around forever. You can be seen relatively quickly and access medical help quite quickly. So if you're really feeling bad now, NHS 111 is very good. And the bit in between those two is a service called IAPT, Improving Access to Psychological Therapies. If you Google IAPT Leicester, that'll give you the local numbers to ring. And that's a little bit like NHS 111, but it's mainly to do with anxiety and depression.
Thank you very much. And, you know, we're a church, we're not a hospital, but if you just would like somebody to listen to, we'd be very happy to do that. And you can get in touch with us. Our website, knighton.org.uk, is on the YouTube site, and just go down there, email us. Somebody will phone you back and we can chat with you. And we can't actually come and see you very easily at the moment, but we can talk. We can find ways of talking.
One website worth looking at is a fantastic website put together by the Christian Medical Fellowship called The Human Journey. And it's got articles by Christian medics on everything we've talked about and lots and lots more. That's well worth going to for just more information, more insight.
Dave, thank you so much. Really enjoyed talking to you tonight. Thank you if you've been listening. We're really grateful. Thank you for putting up with the technical problems we had. But hey, we're still here after an hour, so that's good. I wasn't expecting that. So
all this on an iPhone, I'm amazed.
There you go. That's pretty good. Come and join us next week then, when Dave's going to be back. Dr. Hilary Johnson will be joining us as well. On Friday night, 7:30 on this channel, Michael Otts is going to be back, and he's going to be answering, what am I worth? Searching for dignity in an undignified world. And we're going to have a question panel after that, and you can put your questions to us. Again, Dave, thanks very much. We're going to sign off, but we're really grateful for you joining us. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. And greetings to everybody.